Okay, once again, my name is John Zeman, Safety Specialist with TPM, and today we're going to go over safety compliance, the programs and different training frequencies that are needed so that we can stay up to date, not only keep our people safe, but also to be in compliance with the law. So we're just going to kind of do a brief overview of a few things, and then we'll get right into the meat and potatoes of these topics. Okay, today we're going to explore the path to safety programs. Training compliance will also go over training requirements for each program to ensure regulatory compliance. Some of the specific topics we'll go over today is what is a hazard, how to do a hazard assessment, types of hazards, and then the controls of those hazards, and then how do we wrap our arms around all of these hazards, and that's through the use of programs. And then how do we let our people know about things, and that's through the use of training. And then how all this fits into the compliance of OSHA or state safety regulatory type agencies. As you can see there's a Homer Simpson. If you see a hazard, report it. Hazard assessments. What hazards do we expose our personnel to? We always have to look at that when we want to start a new process or go back and look at the processes that we already do. We want to look at, well, what do we expose our people to? That's how you start a hazard assessment. And it's actually part of a requirement, and it's a very positive way that we can interact with our employees, is by doing a hazard assessment, look at the jobs that our workers do, and then look at the hazards that are involved with each step of the job that they do. So a basic hazard assessment, well, kind of like this picture here shows, look around, find the hazards, then assess the risks, and then find ways to control the risks, and then, get the work done. Basically, a hazard is defined as any condition that can possibly cause injury, illness, or death. So you look at it, something flying at our employees' eyes. Well, how do we manage that? So we're going to go through some basic types of hazards just so you can kind of maybe give you an aha moment of your facility to kind of think about these things. The first one we'll look at here is biological hazards. Bloodborne pathogens, mold, sewage, insects, snakes. Those are all different types of biological hazards that we may have at our work site. So we have to look at these hazards. Do we have these? And if we have them, we have to manage them. Chemicals, do we have chemicals? Do we use chemicals? And then what are the hazards with those chemicals? Are they carcinogens? Are they flammable? Are they corrosive? Are they explosive? Are they irritants? And are they toxic? Can they build up in our bodies over time and cause a type of problem, lead poisoning, or maybe a cancer from the carcinogens, different things like that? Or carbon monoxide too. It depletes our blood of the oxygen capacity carrying. Ergonomic hazards. And this is the one we've been working on lately a lot with, we have the OSHA grant to do ergonomic training for all of our members and to be involved with increasing the awareness of ergonomic hazards because of the cost associated with these types of injuries. So you have to look at what are the hazards involved with ergonomics? Well, posture and movement, awkward body positioning, excessive force, vibration, gripping, and repetitive motions. So the more we do of these things in conjunction with the other factors increases the likelihood of an injury. So we have to look at, do we have these things? If we do, well, how are we going to manage them? Housekeeping, like if you block an access, combustible dust, limit visibility, overhead items. Can something fall on our workers? Can something from vibration, a box or something heavy fall off something collapse? You have your racking and sorting techniques. Can anything fall and hit our workers? Slippery floors, and then trip hazards. This all can be looked at with housekeeping. Now mechanical, this is one of the things, that we talk about and it can really hurt our people, We have exposed moving parts. So that's like your how do we control exposed moving parts? We control them with guarding. So we look through our facility and we look, do we have mechanical hazards? Do we have guarding issues? Is there moving parts can people get their hands into, their body into? If we do, well, how do we manage those? Well, through machine guarding. So we'll look at mechanical hazards. We've got to find throughout our facility in this hazard assessment, we have to look at the moving parts. Now, is there stored energy? Like if we have a jam and then we get in to remove the jam, is something going to start back up and crush somebody? Got to look at that kind of scenario. Electricity, I mean, is there electrocution hazards? Are things in our facilities grounded to help control the flow of electricity so that it doesn't flow through our workers and injure them? And then projectiles, flying particles, sawdust, flying through the air, coming off the different processes that we do. I mean, how do we control that? Physical force, we have noise, and then temperatures, you know, the different environmental factors, the hot and cold, and welding, you have radiation, sunburns, different things like that for radiation. Fire, I mean, you know, what is our buildup of our fuels in our workplaces? Do we have, you know, dust buildup, creating fire hazards? Do we have oil? Where do we keep all of our fuels, our gases? Or do we protect our fuel tanks, you know, in case something would run into them? And you got to look at all the different physical hazards across our sites too. Now, position hazards like fall protection, you know, using ladders, getting on roofs, cranes. Do we do that at our facility? If so, how do we control it? Do we have shelves? Do we, you know, traffic? You know, do we have log trucks coming in? Do we have forklifts? Do we have worker automobiles? I mean, how do we separate? How do we manage the positional hazards at our facility? So we're going to look at, well, how do we do all this? How do we control these hazards? Because we have to identify them with a hazard assessment, and then we have to learn how to control them individually. And violence can be a hazard, active shooter, different things like that. Now, how do we have a plan for that? Do we organize? What do we do if we have an employee that's disgruntled and wants to cause harm? I mean, is that a hazard? Do we have a possibility of that? Well, the answer is usually yes. I mean, if you identify it, we need to control it. So how do we protect our personnel from hazards? That's what we want to really get into, right? I mean, we got laws and regulations and all that kind of stuff, but the bottom line is, how do we identify the hazards? Okay, we've identified the list of them there. Okay, do we have those? If the answer is yes, the next step is, how do we protect our personnel? How do we control these hazards? If you look at this pyramid here, this is kind of the flow that you want to do. First off, can we eliminate the hazard? Can we totally eliminate the hazard? I mean, step back from it and look at it. Well, is this a necessary hazard? Do we have to expose our people to this? If not, what can we do? Substitution, can we use something else that it may be like a chemical that isn't as hazard but does the same job? Maybe it's even cheaper. It just depends how you all figure out the different costs of things, but can this somehow be substituted for something less hazardous? And then engineering, like, for example, putting a guard on a pinch point, guarding something, physically setting up a barrier to stop our employees from getting hurt, engineering something that stops the contact between the worker and whatever the hazard is, engineering something, taking care of it, physically protecting our workers from the injuries that can occur. Now, sometimes we look at engineering controls. A lot of times, if you already have a facility that's built, a lot of times engineering controls can be very expensive. So sometimes we need to focus on administration and looking at how do we organize the work, how do we do the training, and how do we do, say, like the different work positions, and how do we rotate employees, and how do we, you know, get people to understand the hazards so that they take it on themselves to protect themselves. And then last line of defense is always personal protective equipment. If you can eliminate the noise through elimination or administration by rotating your employees, not exposing them to the loud saw all day long, well, maybe we don't have to wear earplugs at all. We can totally eliminate the need for earplugs if we can rotate people through administrative. So you're only around the loud saw for, say, 2 hours versus 8 hours. Well, then we're not required, and we don't have to worry about subjecting our employees to a possible hearing injury. So we can kind of look at that, and that's kind of the flow of how we control the hazards. So engineering, you have the guard. Administrative, you have the different work positions. You have maybe someone doing grading or someone reviewing, you know, the lumber as it goes through. Well, Can we move them so that they're not using the same ligaments and tendons? Can we rotate them around? Administrative controls work very nicely with ergonomic hazards, with noise hazards, and also with chemical exposure hazards. So, and a lot of the research out there says you want to stay around that 3-hour mark, maximum of 3 hours, depending on how your workday is all set up. So if you're looking at, okay, let's reduce the ergonomic stress on our people. Well, let's rotate them through. Let's give them 3 hours this job, 3 hours this job, 3 hours this job. That's about the optimum. When you get over 3 hours of the same kind of repetitive type muscle use and ligaments, tendons use, is when you start seeing injuries, is over that 3-hour mark. So what you want to do is you want to, rotate people around 3 hours. Anything over 4, really, if the curve really goes up, the risk factor goes way up as you go over 4 hours for the same repetitive type job. So you kind of want to look at it, how can I rotate my people? As long as it's just a small change in the actual specific ligaments and tendons and muscles that they use, it's enough to be able to average out the stress, on their ergonomics, on their body itself and how they interact with their job. Same goes for noise. If you have one loud area, well, if you rotate them around, well, then you only have them 2 hours, this other person's 2 hours, so that averages out their total weight. Now, if you're looking at compliance, everything on compliance is based on time-weighted average. In an 8-hour workday, you can only expose your people to 85 decibels. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you have one guy 2 hours, another guy 2 hours, well, that 85 goes down considerably to go to a quiet area to a loud area. If you rotate them around, then you're not exposing them. You're dropping the overall time-weighted average considerably by rotating your people. Another factor you can look at too with the rotation thing is also allowing people, like with turnover and people quitting and stuff, because if they get into one job, they do it 8 hours a day every day, they can be very unhappy. But if you rotate them around, they get a feel for multiple things throughout the day, so it kind of breaks it up and makes it a little bit easier for them to deal with mentally and to stay working for you, right? So those are administrative controls. Look at, well, can we train these people better? So you can provide classes and make them identify these risk factors and the hazards and how to control them themselves, so they take ownership. And that's part of this administrative fixes. The last line of defense, though, is your personal protective equipment. So if you don't have to do like respiratory protection, that's one of the hardest programs to run, is respiratory protection. There's a lot of holes that a lot of times OSHA or regulation inspectors can punch in there and give you lots of fines in the respiratory protection program. So what can we eliminate it? Well, yeah, through engineering and through it's like putting up very good ventilation systems to pull that horrible chemical out of the breathing zone, so you don't even register as far as being over the permissible exposure limit for that specific chemical. So, but if you can't do any of that, then maybe your last line of defense is the PPE. So you need to, get the correct PPE. Is the noise at 92 decibels? Well, you got to make sure that your hearing protection is able to reduce the amount of noise below that 90. So that's what you kind of got to look at. And also you got to make sure people wear their earplugs correctly. That's one of the things that I've been seeing as I've been around, is people wearing earplugs correctly. Having them in is one thing, but the way energy works and the way sound works is that if you have a leak in your earplug of more than 5%, almost 90% of that noise or that energy from that sound can get through that earplug and hit your eardrum and cause damage. So that's one of the things, getting the PPE as the last line of defense. We'd rather quiet down, do the engineering or the administrative, because that can really protect the worker, because you don't have to worry about the worker, say, dealing with their if they wear the earplug correctly or not. So those are kind of the things you want to look at. Always last line of defense is the PPE. I mean, can we put a curtain up that stops the wood chips from shooting them in the eye? Well, then put that up. That's an engineering control, so you don't have to give them safety glasses, because there's no particles flying at them. So that's kind of the thing you got to look at as the last line of defense, but it's a control, and according to OSHA and the regulations, we have to control our hazards. We cannot subject our workers to hazards without any kind of controls. Another part, you want to have a hazard assessment, but at bare minimum, you want to have a PPE assessment. So you basically make a list of the jobs you do, and you list what PPE they wear to protect them from the hazards. And part of regulatory, they want to see that. They want to see this PPE assessment. Talking with like in Washington, L&I consultation, they want to see PPE assessment. They want to see it listed out, that you have assessed these jobs, you have assessed the controls, you've assigned controls of different PPE for each one, and that's what you need to show them, and that's also, shows practice. That's what we do to protect our people, and that's what they care about, especially for regulatory. Now, one of the biggest questions you'll get from regulators that'll come in is, how do I know? How do you do this? How do you protect your people? And the simple answer to that is, we have a program. We have a documented program that we can show you that says, we do this for this type of hazard, this is how we control it, and this is how our people are safe to do our work that we have here. And they're always happy to see that. When they come in that front door and you greet them with a smile and a handshake, and they start asking about things, saying, hey, we have a safety manual, we have programs, we've done a hazard assessment, we manage all of our hazards with engineering controls, administrative controls, and then PPE, and this is how we do it. When they see that, you get a gold star right away. And then you can, and especially if you practice what you preach, you're going to be in very good shape as far as any kind of OSHA inspection or regulatory inspection. And that always comes down to the injury levels. If you're doing all this kind of stuff, you're not going to have the injuries. Now, training. How do we get our people to understand the risks involved with their jobs? And how do we do the job for production? And how do we do the job for safety and also for quality? So training our people on these different hazards associated with the work they do, it should be all run together. So if they're going to be, operating a trim saw, show them how to do the trim saw, show them the do's and don'ts, not only for safety, but also for production. Run it all together. They do the job all as one thing. We shouldn't separate the safety and the production. Explain it all to them. When they you get a new person, explain to them, don't do this, do this, not only for production, but for safety. Explain all that. Put together a nice training, and then always document that, because that's our proof that we've took the time and we have the care to show our employees, not only for us to be in business, but also to keep them safe in the workplace. So you always want to have the training that you present them, and also document what training, what people have participated and who did the training and the dates and all that. You put all that together. Now we're going to shift a few gears here, and we're going to get into some of the specific safety programs. And I'm going to go through and we're going to talk about kind of who's affected by the programs and the frequency of the training, and kind of any kind of nuts and bolts as far as specific programs that we kind of need to function. Okay, one of the big ones, we'll kind of go alphabetical order here. So starting with A, we got accident reporting. A lot of us deal with accident reporting in our employee handbook, if we have an employee handbook. And if you don't have an employee handbook, let us know here at TPM. We would love to put together an employee handbook so that when you have new people come in and old people, whatever, so you can explain to them how your operations work, and so who do you talk to, how do you do this, how do you do that. It's all in a nice handbook, and we can do that for you as well. So actually we have accident reporting, explains to employees how to report injuries. People have to know, who do I talk to? How do I report an injury? If I get hurt, how do I report myself, my injury? And the frequency that's required is initial. When someone starts a job, they need to be told on how to report injuries. The next one that's a required annual, initial and an annual training is bloodborne pathogens. Basically, it just explains to our employees how to deal with body fluids. Because and even when we work in the office, the risk is there. We could cut ourselves, get blood on something. We could get a bloody nose even. Dry air. It doesn't have to be a big cut. So you say, well, how am I exposed? I work on a computer all day. Well, you could get a bloody nose. However, that's part of the deal. We have to train our employees on how to deal with fluids like blood and other things. Basically, the way I usually talk about this is, if it's sticky, nicky, and it's not yours, don't touch it. And all employees need to be trained, and it's initial and annual. This is one of the big annual ones. You need to hit on the bloodborne pathogens. It's very important to regulations. Another program is compressed gases. If you use compressed gases in your facility, you need to train them on a minimum of initial. When you start the job, you need to know about compressed gases if you use them. If you're a welder, you use the tanks. Or if any way you be handling them, you be taking the covers off them, you need to be trained on them if you use them. Confined spaces, explains to employees how to enter permit required confined spaces. Now, confined spaces, something, you say permit required, non-permit. Basically, a confined space is something that's not intended for human occupancy. It's not a normal work area. And there's, other factors that can involve like other hazards, like slip and fall hazards, chemical hazards, anything in there that can cause a problem inside of a hole. So anything that you can climb into is basically a confined space. So what we want to look at this is who is involved in the confined space. If you're handing someone tools, you are considered exposed to the confined space and you need to be trained. Well, I don't go in there. Well, it doesn't matter. The way the law reads is that if you are exposed to it, you're handing tools, if you're even around it. Because our human nature, because we're good people and we always want to help. Well, if someone gets hurt and someone falls or someone's in there saying, oh, I need help, what are you going to do? You're going to rush in there and save somebody. Well, that's why OSHA says everybody that's even remotely exposed to a confined space needs to be trained on the dangers of a confined space. Number one is you don't enter to save somebody, especially if it's a permit required, like if there's a known, you test the air or anything like that. If we know there's a bad hazard in there, because all that happens is bodies will pile up inside that space. So you need to be trained. You don't rush in and save somebody a lot of times. You need to identify that atmosphere that might be in that confined space that maybe have caused the initial person to go down or get in trouble. So those are the things why everybody needs to be trained on, and it's initial, and if there's a change in it's annual. Confined spaces kill a lot of people every year, so they found it important enough that you need to train on initially, if you change or if you add a new space, and then annual, it needs to be updated. Has anything changed? Has anything changed? You always have to ask that question when you're doing anything. You add the process, well, what's different? Are we using dry wood versus wet wood? Whatever. You got to always look at it. What are the differences when we change a process? What maybe will raise a new hazard? So that's why they say annual for confined spaces to train on that. Electrical safety is basically initial and if there's a change. So anybody that works on electricity, say if you're putting in new outlets or you're changing cord ends or you're involved in electricity some way or form, you need to be trained on electricity. Basically, it's a best practice to train everybody initially, especially if you're working out and about around electricity, just to get some basic understanding of it. So it's an initial thing of authorized and affected people. So if you're not going to be working on it at all, you don't need to be trained, but everybody usually some way, shape, or form is exposed to electricity. Even like using a coffee pot. It just depends. It's all layers of protection. That's what these training events do for us as a business, is that it's a layer of protection that we can say, hey, we've notified our employees, we've trained them on these different hazards, we've controlled these hazards. It's to protect our business in case of a tragedy. So also, to keep us in business. So in my opinion, it's always best to just train everybody on electricity, but that's the law, though. Here says it's authorized and affected people need to be trained initially, and if you change or you install or you add a new process in your worksite. Emergency action plans. We like to hit on this one and say this is a yearly thing. One of the big things that I really like to see is inviting in your local fire marshal, your fire department chief in your local area. Have them come to your facility so it's not their first rodeo, as they say, to be at your facility. Some of us are lucky and maybe we have some of our employees or some of us are on the fire, in the fire department, different things like that, volunteer fire department. That's great. But we want to get those people in so they're familiar, so they know where our fuels are. They know who has keys to buildings if we need to get in there. You can even go as far as having a fire plan and give to them so that if they come in, they can pull your file and they can know where all the hazards are. So that's a very good best practice type of situation. But basically, emergency action plan is just like that little picture there, evacuation assembly area. All employees need to know where they go in the event of an emergency. Is that a tornado, a thunderstorm? Is that a fire? Is that, whatever, active shooter? Those are all types of emergency action plan things that need to be done. And the training frequency initial, and if there's a change, and usually there's always a change every year, it is a very, very active living type program. We always need to keep our emergency action plan very up to date. Phone numbers change, new people come in and off of, say, like our different committees, stuff like that. So it's always good to train on emergency action plans on a yearly basis. So that's kind of what we'll talk about for that one. Now, ergonomics program. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you, I mean, ergonomics, there's not a specific standard on ergonomics, but there is the standard of the safe work standard. We need to, if you expose our employees to a hazard, we have to control that hazard. Well, ergonomics, repetitive stress, that is a hazard. Well, how do we control that? Well, ergonomics program can do that. Identifying what is our rotation of workers. Do we have, like this picture here is that raising table. I've seen that at facilities. That's awesome, so that people don't have to stoop over as far. And it's all about those positioning. So with ergonomics, it needs to be initial, and if there's a change, an annual. That's how important ergonomics is nowadays, especially the cost and the bottom line of our business. It's so important to get our people trained on body positioning and certain ways to do things so that they don't expose themselves or overexpose themselves to an ergonomic hazard. So, there's not a specific standard that says annual or specific standard that says all this, but I'm going off of my, professional judgment by saying we need to get a program together and we need to train on it, and we need to be very vocal on this, because this is what costs us a lot of money, is the ergonomics and people getting injuries, malingering injuries, people hurting. And it's just the right thing to do, because we don't want people hurt all the time. I mean, back injuries, shoulder injuries, I mean, people are tough, they'll fight through it, but they're gonna not look forward to going to work because their shoulder hurts, so we got to look at that ahead of time. And that's the thing with ergonomics, we always want to get ahead of it, and we want to be proactive on it, because if you're being reactive, it's too late. It takes so long, and usually a lot of times they don't fix themselves. So we want to catch it right away, and that's why it's so important to develop an ergonomics program. Fire extinguisher programs, if your company uses fire extinguishers, people need to be trained on them. So anyone's affected, anyone that should use a fire extinguisher, basically, if you have them in your facility, you need to train them, initial and annual. You need to at least go over the pass system, pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze the lever slowly, sweep from side to side. A lot of our fire extinguisher companies, if we contract with a company that comes in and they swap out our keep our tags up to date and do our inspections for us, stuff like that, they will also put on classes too, and I can put on classes for you as well. But we want to get people familiar with using fire extinguishers so that they're effective. We want to be able to use them effectively so that we can save a lot of our, not only our life loss, stuff like that, but our buildings. I mean, if you can put out a quick fire quickly, you can save so much money by doing that. If people are trained well and they hit that fire when it's acceptable, because you only have, fire extinguishers are made for small fires, but that's the thing, you got to get people to respond and people to take care of that fire effectively right off the bat. So I mean, that's why it's very important, and it's required, initial and annual, to do fire extinguishers. Fire prevention programs, it's initial, it's kind of part of, you can roll it all into a fire section. It's just kind of individual program on knowing the fuel, the areas that are and can become fire related, so people identify where they can and can't do things and what to look out for, and that's all affected employees. That's initially, so that can be put into part of something, maybe your emergency action plan, but I just wanted to explain that. First aid, that's initial and periodic. If you want to have your people like first aid certified and all that kind of stuff, there's different timetables on that. But basically, it's an initial thing. You need to know basic responding people. If you want people to respond to each other, and you want people to do first aid on each other, then you need to train on it. And that how to treat minor wounds or how to patch people up till the ambulance gets there. And time is always of the essence. That's why first aid is so important, to help at least get people like blood stopped if it's a major injury or different things like that, or if it's a back injury or a fall, how to lay people out correctly so that they don't further injure them. That's why first aid is such a good deal for us to do for people. And the training requirement on this is initial, and then if you want to keep certifications, it's every 2 to 3 years depending upon what kind of certification you want to carry. So basically all employees designated to respond. It's not all employees, but if you want to do all employees, that's a best practice. But at a minimum, you want, if you have supervisor, whoever you want to do, first aid and ready to go. Housekeeping, well, housekeeping, I've seen a lot of citations with this because of the wood dust that we deal with all the time. We got accumulations of wood dust, according to the standard, if it's over 1/8 of an inch and it's fine dust under 420 microns, then it poses a combustible dust hazard, and that's what they cite you under is housekeeping. You don't keep your place clean, exposed to combustible dust, which is a hazard, will cite you under 1910-22, the housekeeping standard. So basically people need to be trained on that. You'd have a plan together, explain people, this is our schedule, this is our housekeeping. There's actually another section we'll talk about dust, but training frequency initially, and if plan changes. Do we clean up every Friday? Do we clean up 4 days a week, or every, at noon? I mean, however you do your schedule, you train on that so people know their expectations so that they can be, take care of the housekeeping issues as they come up and maintain them and stay on top of them so they don't get away from you. Leading into the combustible dust, that's where I've seen the citations for combustible dust from our inspectors is basically under this housekeeping. You got dust, if it's under 420 microns, if it's under 25% moisture content, here's the citation. It's buildup of more than 1/8 of an inch. So that's kind of where it comes at, is staying on top of this. Most of the citations are over 4 or 5 inches, because there's some gray area, so they don't want to cite you for, it's over 1/8 of an inch, here's a citation. They don't want to have to fight all that. So basically, if there's a couple inches, that's where I see the citations, especially if it's fine dust. So you really, really got to watch out for the dust, say in the planer rooms, where you have that fine dust. Combustible dust basically is the dust that's, say, like a flour almost. It's really fine dust. So wherever you have that fine dust, that's where you got to worry about getting the citations, and that's the areas you need to concentrate on cleanup for the combustible dust type of deal. That's kind of a buzzword with OSHA and the inspectors, is this combustible dust thing. So that's where you got to look at, okay, where do I have the fine dust, and prioritize your cleanup schedules around the fine dust, the planer rooms, or if you're in, say, the particle board stuff, the really fine dust is where you need to concentrate your cleanup efforts and to take care of that. And then also to look at, and we have all these programs. I have a really nice combustible dust program that I've drawn up, and it goes through, you identify what is the dust sources, you identify, how do you mitigate those, how do you control the dust, do you have a collection system, do you have a cleanup type of schedule, but you have to identify what's the buildup, how fast does the dust build up, and then you need to adjust the cleanup frequency according to how fast that dust builds up, so that you can kind of keep that control of that dust so it doesn't get out of control. And usually that's the day that someone stops by and visits, right? But anyways, and then after all that, then you have to also, in that program, you put ignition sources, because we all know fires, they all come from a few, you have to have the few elements to get a fire. You got to have the fuel, you got to have the oxygen, you have to have the ignition source, and for explosions, you have to have confinement also. But ignition sources, that's why when I go around and do inspections, I let you guys know about everything. I mean, I see a cord, that can be drawn into this. That can get all pulled into this. Well, you got dust, you got dust there, you got you're missing a ground on a cord, you got damaged cords, you got all this kind of stuff. Well, those are heat issues. And anything over 300, it can get up to about 399 degrees. Anything hotter than that is an ignition source, and then they can cite you under that too for combustible dust. So you kind of want to look at, identify. So this program that I've developed, it actually will show you how to draw all this up. There's like little tables where you put in your what creates the dust, and then the ignition sources, it's all right in there. It's really nice. So that's combustible dust. Hand tools, basically if you have a hazard, let's say like you're dealing with chisels, stuff like that, mushroomed heads. I've seen citations on mushroomed heads on chisels, a few $1,000 for a chisel. All you gotta do is grind off the ends of them. But I mean, have a program, have a way to manage those, or a schedule. One of the best ways to deal with a lot of this stuff is to have checklists, and have a way to, okay, we checked our tools, and we checked our handles, we've checked our, just a checklist, check, right? So it allows us to stay on top of it, because time goes by and we're getting production done, and then things can get away from us. So having a nice hand tool safety, and training on hand tools needs to be initial, and anytime you add a new tool to the process. You have to train on it so people know the hazards involved and how to control the hazards, like to wear safety glasses when you're hammering because something is shard off, hit you in the eye, different things like that. So you got to understand all that and put all that in there. And also to know who to notify if a tool is broken. Broken tools cause a lot of little accidents that turn into big accidents because a lot of infection comes from tools, because you get a cut and it's a dirty tool and you get infection from that, and that can really snowball into a horrible injury. I've seen it before. It's just bad deal all the way around. So the hand tool safety program, hazardous communication is kind of the new thing. I mean, it's changing, coming up here. So basically with hazardous communication, you need to train on it initially. So when you get a new worker, or if you've never trained on it, you need to do it. And then if you add a new chemical, you need to train on that new chemical. And the new system is nice because all chemicals follow 16 different parts, so all of them are very standardized now, so that you can do the training on the different chemicals that you use. And basically everybody that is at your site that is exposed to chemicals needs to be trained on hazardous communication. And you go through the parts of the training. Basically are you need to tell your people what chemicals you have. And if any of them are really hardcore, really horrible chemicals, carcinogenic and stuff like that, you need to explain that to people so that they will take the seriousness of these chemicals and they will, take care of them. They'll wear gloves or they'll do different things. They'll understand why. And that's what the training element of all of these programs does, is it explains to our people, why is it important that I take these safety precautions? It's not because OSHA said so. It's so that I can minimize the risk and reduce or eliminate injuries. That's the point of why, we do all these kind of things. Okay, hearing conservation, anything over 85 decibels, time-weighted average, there you go again, the time-weighted average. If you can minimize, move people around, then you won't be over that 85 and you can save yourself a lot of money. So if you look at this, if you are over 85, then you're fall under this whole hearing conservation program. So you have to have initial training and you have to have annual training, you have to have audiometric testing and all that kind of stuff. So that's why that administrative control of rotating people is very important to lower that average down. So basically it just explains, wearing earplugs and how to identify risk and how do you know when it's too loud. Do you have to raise your voice when you're talking to someone next to you? Usually if you do, it's probably about 80, 85, 90 decibels if you have to yell at someone standing next to you. It's kind of a rule of thumbs you can kind of go through. And I can help all of you guys with any of this stuff if you have any further questions, of course. Hot work. So one of the big ignition sources, say for the combustible dust too, but we want to look at, okay, with hot work, you want to look at initial, and if you add a new process. And a lot of times, what are you welding? You have to identify what you're welding. If anything is stainless steel, you probably have to have chrome in it, and then you better call me because I can help you with that, because chrome, the inspectors, stuff like that, they see stainless steel, they'll think chrome, and then they'll dig in, because so you have to very identify with your welders, people that are doing the welding, they need to understand not only the fire hazards and dealing with hot stuff and all that kind of stuff, but also what are the things they're welding. Because if you're welding stainless steel, you release chrome into the atmosphere and you're breathing that in. So then you get into respiratory protection and all that kind of stuff. So there's engineering fixes where you can use filtration, air systems. There's portable ones that can control that atmosphere. So hot work is one area that on initial and then new process. The reason why it's required for new processes is if you go from welding steel to stainless steel, there's a difference. It's not just metal. Metal isn't metal. You got to know what's the composition of the metal too, so you're not overexposing your people to harmful chemicals that are associated with the different welding operations. So I mean that's why you have a program to identify the hazards, and then how do we control them? That's the whole thing with all these programs. Identify the hazard and then control the hazard. And the programs explain how we do all that. Ladder safety, some people roll that into their fall protection program and have a subsection of ladder safety. And initially, if you add a new ladder type, I mean, this is a pretty neat ladder. If you guys see the picture here, where it's got a platform and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's all kind of, but whenever you change what you do, you need to train people on it. It needs to be documented so that you have that layer of protection, and people know how to use stuff. They're usually more efficient if they know how to use something. Lockout, tagout, you need to have initial when you change something, and annual, because it's very serious. People die from this all the time. That's why it's an annual requirement. And when you do the training, before you do the annual training, you're not just training a lockout tagout, you're also doing a plan review. You want to review what plans you have, like how do you lock out the trim saw? Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. Has that changed? Have we updated our equipment? Has any of that changed? You always want to do an evaluation yearly as well, especially if there's some changes. So we modify our training, and that's why it's required annually, so we can add in the training to the Lockout Tagout program. So people are very, very aware of any changes, so they don't forget a step in which leads to catastrophic repercussions. So anybody that's involved in Lockout Tagout needs to put their lock on it. Well, I'm just handing the guy tools. Same thing as confined space, basically. If you're around it and you're exposed to it, you need to put your lock on it, and you need to be trained on it. You know, because what happens? Oh, I'm gonna hand him a tool, or real quick, I'll get in there and I'll help him, or I'll pull him out, or whatever. Real quick kills more people than anything. So that's why everybody that's around a lockout situation needs to put their lock on there so they can control that energy. They cannot start that machine back up until that you've removed your lock and everybody's clear, right? So that's lockout, tagout. It's initial, it's when there's changes, and it's annual. So you need to have a very specific program and a plan for each of your lockout situations to stay in compliance. Machine guarding, if you have a lot of machines, moving parts, people will put together a nice machine guarding program that basically details on how we do, we explains how areas are assessed. We look at the different guarding and the different engineering controls that we use to protect our people. Now this picture here is actually of guard by area, right? Well, sometimes it's easier just to block off a whole area and say nobody gets in here when this thing's running. Well, that's what that is. It's a guard by distance, by area. They don't guard every little moving part. They actually just guard the whole area and say nobody comes in here. So sometimes that can be a way. So you can look at it, well, can we guard by area? Is that cheaper? Is that more effective? Or should we guard just one little thing? Well, if you have 20 little things, it's easier just to guard by area and keep people totally out of there while it's running. So those are kind of the things you got to look at. And then the frequency on machine guarding is initial, and then if you make changes. A lot of times people like to do it annually, just as a best practice, to go through, maybe make a list of all the things that have guards on it, and then you can go back through and check and make sure all your guards are on there. This way you can stay on top of your program with the machine guarding, because you work on something, you take a guard off, you don't put the guard back on, life goes on. Pretty soon you don't even know where the guard went to, and then there's no guard. So if you have like an audit system, maybe once a year you go through your plant and you check everything, you maybe list out your guards. I've seen it done that way. So every machine that has a guard is listed, so you know exactly your inventory basically of your guards. I mean, that's kind of extreme, but I mean, that's the best practice of how to stay on top of the guarding. Personal protective equipment, and we got fall protection. Sometimes I've seen this as it's either way. You can do personal protective equipment as its own standalone program, or you can have a personal protective section in each of the other programs that require personal protective equipment. Basically, it goes through and says, okay, PP is used to control these types of hazards, and this is maintenance, this is control, like say, for example, respirators. If you have respirators, it's really important to have this in there so you have an actual, how do you maintenance and care of your respirators? That's a big thing. OSHA sees our inspectors come in, they see a respirator hanging there all dirty, that does write violations all day on that one, because number one, you're not trained. Obviously people aren't trained because they don't take care of their PPE, because right in the standard says you got to, if it's not on your face and you're not, cleaning it, you need to store it somewhere safe so it doesn't get dirty. That will affect the seal and bond to your face and will reduce its effectiveness. So on personal protective equipment, it's initial, and anytime you add something new, you need to train on it, and that's that one. Forklifts, basically initial and changes, and to keep your people certified from your company certification. Every 3 years there needs to be a skills assessment. So you need to do the initial type of training, like a classroom training, and then every 3 years a skills assessment. That's the checklist, and that has to be done by your company, the skills assessment. Some competent person you have there, someone that has some knowledge of it, running them well. Usually your most senior person is the best person to do, because it's all layers of protection, right? So you want to look at the different skills that you do, lifting it up, backing up, the use of everything, the walk around, the inspections. So you go through that checklist, and every 3 years, and then document that, put that in their file so you can keep all the documentation of all your forklift drivers. Respiratory protection, this is another very important one. A lot of people get injured by not using this correctly, so the regulations are a lot stricter. So you have initial, whenever there's changes, you have annual refreshers also need to be done. So when you look at respiratory protection, you have to have the medical exam, and then you have to have the fit test, and then you have to have all the documented training, and all of that goes together. So when we talk about putting all these together in a nice little book, and you can show the inspector when they come in, here's our hazard assessment, here's our programs, how we manage and control the hazards, here's all our training, here's our training documentation, boom. You get all these gold stars right away. And then if you practice what you preach, you'll be in good shape for any kind of audit. Now, regulatory compliance is kind of what we just talked about. You have hazard assessment, PPE assessment, hazard controlled with a program, documented training, and organized safety manual. So my goal to help you all with is to get this organized, and so that you can kind of wrap your hands around all these safety programs, and so that it's not only is easy for you to maintain, but also it's easy for you to communicate it with a new hire or a new person or old person that you're retraining, different things like that. But so you have a very organized, and that gets you a gold star right away for any type of regulatory compliance inspection, that you have your stuff together and they're happy to see that. That means that you care. Right away they smile. Most of the inspectors I've run into, they're in it for personal reasons. Their dad, their grandpa, their uncle got killed or hurt or maimed. They're in it. They don't care about money. They care about helping. And a lot of them are so used to being lied to so much that they get defensive if they feel you're lying to them. But if you start out with a nice program, with a smile, a handshake, you present to them your program, and then when they go interview your folks, you've done the training, they're happy. They won't dig in, say so much, and find all these little things. Well, if you're doing the right thing and you're presenting a good safety program and you've built a culture there, they're going to be happy when they come in. And they're not, hopefully the fines they do, right, if they find anything, will be a lot smaller, because the way that all this works is most serious violations start out at $7,000. Depending upon factors, they reduce that amount. So right away, if you have a program, you have good training documentation, you know what you're talking about, your people are trained, they know what they're talking about, right away, you're going to get good faith. So if they do find something, that $7,000 mark, because you've had mitigation, you've had controls in place, and people are trained on it, that $7,000 comes down considerably. And sometimes, they'll just, if you show that you're not lying to them and they're happy with being there and happy that you're trying, a lot of times they'll give you a helpful hint. They'll maybe put it on the list, and maybe they won't even fine you. But this is kind of the way that I would like to see all of us do this, is being able to be very organized when they come in. And that's my job, is to help you all with this whole getting our arms wrapped around this deal. So what I've put together, one way to do all this is through a self-audit. I have a sheet put together with all the programs, so we can do a hazard assessment. Do we need these programs? Yes or no? And then establishing a written program to address all of our hazards. And then where are they? Where's the location? Where do we keep it? I mean, do we got it in the back? Do we got it in the front? Where is it? Locating that. And then also, where's our training? Where's our what do we train on? Like our slides, we can print that out, put in there. Where's our documentation of who's had it and who's presented it, on what dates? Put all that in there. So we're ready. So we're ready to know where you got to be ready to know where things are, so that you can show them. Because that's right away. Well, we do this right away. The next question is show me, show me, show me, show me, show me. That's what they do. They want you to prove to them what you do. And if you do it, and that's what I'm here for, is to back you up and to help you do all this stuff, so that when they come in, they can feel confident in your competence of running a safety program in a safe company, so that if they do find something, the fines will be greatly reduced, if they even assign you any at all. So, well, basically that's the presentation for today, and I just want to thank all of you for attending. We had a good number today, and if you have any questions, please email me. I'm actually working on putting together all these programs. I have them with me when I go around on a thumb drive I've been giving to a lot of people, and we're going to get them all posted up on our website, so they're all up there. So if you need a program, you can just grab them, put the training. I'm putting the training and the actual program all on the website, so you can grab what you need, so you can do your written safety program audit, so you have all your ducks in a row, so that you know, you can get that smile out of that inspector, and hopefully you'll save your company money and overall lead to a safe work environment for your workers, and everybody can go home happy and healthy and all of that. So once again, this is John Zeman, safety specialist at Timber Product Manufacturers Association, wishing you a very safe and happy day. Thank you for attending, and have a great rest of your day.